They don't put this part in the casserole line? You know the drill church basement, green vinyl chairs, a dozen crock pots humming like old bees, everything smelling faintly of coffee and lilies. People say the right words and carry paper plates and avoid your eyes because grief sticks. It makes folks clumsy. I'm Rachel Monroe, 62. Librarian long enough to learn how to keep a room quiet with just my eyebrows. I buried my husband last Tuesday. Frank ran Monroe Heating and Air for 35 years out here in Willow Bend, Ohio. 2 stoplights, 1 high school, and a river that looks pretty enough until it floods your basement every other spring. I thought the worst thing I'd have to get through that day was the eulogy. Turns out the worst thing was a clipboard. My son Noah found me between the folding tables and the bulletin board with the mission trip sign-ups. He still had his suit jacket on, hair perfect, like he was headed to court. Mom, he said, too soft, the way people talk to a skittish dog. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, hovered behind him in heels that clicked like a metronome on the church tile. He held the clipboard just out of sight from the room, like we were sharing a secret. I printed a few things to make your week easier, he said. Just routine utilities, transfer mailbox key, and something called a durable power of attorney. It's just in case. In case I forget my own name, I guessed. I felt the floor shift a little. Not an earthquake, just that moment. A floating dock wobbles under your foot and you have to catch yourself or go in. I'd been catching myself all week. We can do it later, I told him. Not at the funeral lunch. Vanessa tilted her head in that bright television host way of hers. It's really best to handle these things early, she said. Before everything gets confusing. I have a face I use for teenagers who think they invented arrogance. I put that face on. Heels clicked closer behind us. Miss Carol from choir slid in like the quiet kind of rescue. She's one of those women who has an apron for grief black, with little embroidered doves. We need Rachel Hahn, she said cheerfully to nobody in particular, to taste this green bean casserole because my sister's got heavy hands with the salt. She tucked her arm through mine, and just like that, I had a way out. Little reversal. One I didn't see coming until I felt her fingers squeeze. I'm here. Move. I moved. We ended up by the coffee urn. I used to think coffee fixes everything. Then I turned 62 and learned that boundaries do. Don't sign anything today, Miss Carol murmured, almost musical. You hear me? I hear you, I said. I didn't cry. I don't like giving people a show they didn't buy tickets for. Frank used to say I collect details like other women collect teacups. He wasn't wrong. So here are the details. The lilies at the altar smelled like dish soap. The percolator was whistling a little high, and tucked inside my purse under my reading glasses and a peppermint was Frank's old leather pocket notebook. The one he kept in the glove box of his red F-150. The cover was nicked like a well-used Bible. On the inside flap in Frank's squashed mechanic handwriting, C-17, maple storage, paid through October. I didn't know what C-17 meant yet. I didn't know why he'd written it there, instead of telling me across the kitchen table like everything else. But the weight of that little notebook in my bag felt like a coin in my shoe. You forget it for a minute, then every step reminds you, something's there. Mom, Noah, again? He doesn't give up easy. He came at me from the side this time like a politician. Can we just hear quick initial where I put the flags? I already filled in your birth date so you don't have to worry. He'd filled in my birth date. How considerate. Later I said sweeter than I felt. We'll make an appointment with Pastor Jim. Or Mr. Halpern, our lawyer. Retired twice, still shows up at the Rotary breakfast because he likes the pancakes. Vanessa smiled without letting it touch her eyes. We called Sunny Crest, she said, nibbling the corner of a plastic fork like it was a nervous habit and not practiced theater. Just a tour. It's so lovely, Rachel. They do a Sunday brunch with live piano. No pressure, obviously. You know those moments where everybody pretends a line wasn't just crossed. This was one. I could hear the high school band practicing 3 blocks over. God Bless America wobbly through the open church windows. I could smell the funeral ham and Aunt Jeannie's chocolate sheet cake. And here was my son's wife rolling the words Sunny Crest around like they were a gift, while my husband's photo sat 20 feet away next to a jar of grocery store daisies. "I'm not moving," I said calmly, because calm unnerves people who expect tears. I sleep on the right side of my bed, and the light hits my sink just so in the morning. "I'm staying put." Noah's mouth pressed into a line. When he was little and mad, he'd do that same line, then stomp hard enough to make the Cheerios jump in their bowl. "We just want what's best," he said. Then lower Dad would want you safe. Frank would want a lot of things. He'd want the oil changed at 3,000 miles, his ratchets put back in the right drawer, and for people to tell the truth. He was a simple man who fixed complicated furnaces for simple people. He would not want this. Right then, somebody called my name from the doorway. "Mrs. Monroe." A young woman in scrub's hair pulled up cheeks, flushed. "Do you remember me, Alicia? From the college. You stayed late to help me finish my FAFSA when my mom was in rehab. I haven't heard my own name said with that much relief in years." Alicia wrapped me in a hug you only give to people who stood between you and a cliff once. Over her shoulder, I could see Vanessa's smile thinning, and I'll just say it, that warmed me. "I got my nursing pin last month," Alicia said, eyes bright. "I start nights at the county hospital next week. I wanted to thank you. You told me to keep a to-do list on a sticky note and leave it on the mirror. I swear that saved me. I didn't do anything so special. I just showed her where the forms were and how to breathe when the system tries to convince you it's smarter than you are. But her timing, impeccable. Because while Noah held a pen, this kid held the receipt. We took a picture next to the bulletin board. She tagged the college and wrote, "For the woman who taught me to finish things." The room shifted a little. Not just for me, for the onlookers who were taking notes without admitting they were. Noah cleared his throat. "Mom, we can go by the bank after the luncheon. Just to, get ahead of things. I'm going to need you to use your adult voice," I told him. "The one you use with supervisors. Not the one you use when you want something signed and you're pretending it's my idea." That got me a blink. Two, actually. It isn't that I'm cruel. I know my boy. He's not a villain. He's just been reading from a script somebody else handed him about what old women do and where they go when their husbands die. That script was written by people who sell brunches and call them mercy. Across the room, the funeral director, Mrs. Delgado, caught my eye. She's the kind of woman who can get 6 casseroles into one tiny fridge without denting the foil. She pointed almost imperceptibly at the clipboard in Noah's hand and then shook her head once. "Not today." I sent back a nod so small it barely existed. "Thank you." There are whole languages built from the way women keep each other upright in hard rooms. I set the coffee cup down. My hands weren't shaking anymore. "I'm not signing a thing today," I said, not unkind. "And when I do sign, I'll do it after I read every word out loud with someone I trust in the room. Vanessa shifted the way you do when your plan gets air in it. We're just trying to help." "I know," I said. But help that comes with a deadline and a pen already open isn't always help. The thing about being underestimated is it buys you time. They monologue. They over-explain. They show their hand. And if you keep your eyes on the card table long enough, you'll catch something they hoped you'd miss. Like this, when Noah slid the clipboard toward me, there was a realtor's card paperclipped to the back. Not the one who sold us our house either. A new name, new number, someone fast. I slipped Frank's little notebook out of my purse and put it on the table in front of me. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Just seeing his handwriting calmed the noise in my head. C-17, Maple Storage, paid through October. Why had he written that there? Why had he underlined October twice? Frank once told me in passing that he kept winter insurance. I'd laughed. "We already have insurance," I said. "On the truck, on the house, on your back." He'd grinned and kissed my forehead and said, "Different kind, Rach. The kind that keeps the heat on when fools show up." I thought he meant extra furnace filters. Maybe he didn't. If you stick around, if you want to, There's more to this story than a rude clipboard and a bad day in a church basement. There's a storage unit with a sticky lock and a little secret that changes everything. There's a pastor who knows when to keep his mouth shut, and a sheriff with a long memory, and a neighbor who hears things through a very thin fence. But that afternoon, in the hum and clatter of other people's kindness, I learned something simple people will tell you who they are when they think you're too tired to notice. I noticed. If this hits close to home, stay with me for what comes next and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. I like knowing how far a story can travel when it's finally told out loud. You'd think the hard part would be burying your husband. Turns out the harder part is watching your own child size you up like a house he's already listed for sale. After the funeral, the house got too quiet, too fast. Frank's boots still sat by the door, one lace snapped the way he'd left it. His jacket hung on the back of the chair, like he was about to come in from the cold. 40 years of marriage leave echoes kitchen drawers that creak in the exact tone of his laugh. The back porch that still smells faintly like his pipe smoke. But grief wasn't the heaviest weight in those weeks. Suspicion was. It started small. Noah and Vanessa stopping by just to check in. Bringing takeout when they know I still cook. Leaving brochures on the counter like they were accidentally dropped when anyone with eyes could see they'd been stacked neatly fanned out like a deck of cards, sunny Crest senior living. Meadows of Willow Bend, a place called Harmony. Places that all sounded less like homes and more like waiting rooms. Vanessa has a way of making concern sound like sales pitch. Rachel, you'd love it there. They've got art classes, a pool. You could finally relax. Relax from what? From folding laundry? From tending a rose garden that kept me sane when Frank worked 12-hour shifts, from being the woman who made sure everyone had clean socks. Relax is just another word people use when they want you out of the way. I learned something else too. Grief is camouflage. When you look sad enough, people assume you're not paying attention. So I let them think I was just floating. I let Vanessa rehearse her pity voice, and Noah walk through the house pointing out maintenance issues like he was already planning a Zillow description. I nodded quiet, and I watched, because I had that notebook. Frank's leather pocket journal tucked in my purse like an anchor. And every night when the house was silent and the only sound was the grandfather clock in the hall, I sat at the kitchen table and read his notes. Most were scribbles about jobs, ductwork measurements, part numbers, phone numbers of old clients. But in the back, underlined twice, was a page that made me sit up straighter. Maple Storage Unit C17. Paid through October. See Pastor Jim if needed. Now, I don't know if you grew up in a town like Willow Bend, but let me tell you something about storage units here. They aren't just for Christmas decorations and broken lawnmowers. Around here, a storage unit is where people keep the parts of their lives they can't quite carry at home sometimes. A boat, sometimes a broken dream. What on earth was my husband keeping there? And why loop in Pastor Jim? So I did what librarians do best: research. First stop was the county records office. Small building smells like toner and dust. I smiled at the clerk, a kid who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, and asked for property and lease records under Monroe Heating and Air. Sure enough, there it was. Frank had leased Unit C17 for almost 15 years. Paid on time, never missed. No lien, no delinquency. 15 years. 15 years he'd been keeping something separate. I remember walking back to my car with my hands shaking, the way they did the first time I found a love note Frank had left in my lunchbox when we were dating. Only this time, it wasn't a thrill. It was a question, what did he hide, and why from me? Meanwhile, Noah's visits got more insistent. He'd show up after work in his starched shirt's tie loosened, sighing like he carried the whole county's problems on his shoulders. "Mom," he said one Tuesday, sitting at my kitchen table tapping his finger against the salt shaker. "Have you thought about what comes next?" "I thought I'd finish the quilt I started last winter," I said. "That's not what I mean." Of course it wasn't. He meant power of attorney. He meant selling the house. He meant moving me like a pawn to a square he'd already picked. "You shouldn't have to worry about bills," he pressed. Or keeping this big house warm. Dad wouldn't want you overwhelmed. Funny how people speak for the dead when the dead can't argue back. I smiled, poured him more coffee, and said, "Your father also didn't want to retire at 60, but he did because it was time. I'll know when it's time." That's the thing about staying calm. It rattles folks who want you flustered. Not everyone bought the story Noah and Vanessa were telling. At the grocery store, Miss Carol from choir leaned over her cart and whispered, "Don't let them rush you, Rachel. You've got more backbone than they think." At church, Pastor Jim pressed a folded note into my hand after service. Inside, in his neat preacher's handwriting, was just one line. "When you're ready, I'll take you to Maple Storage." That nearly knocked the air out of me. So he did know. He and Frank had been carrying something together. I put the note in Frank's journal and didn't tell a soul. But here's the strange thing about being underestimated: it gives you breathing room. People stop looking closely when they think you're fading. I started making lists again the way I did when I ran the library. Lists keep chaos honest. I wrote down every bill, every due date, every drawer where Frank had tucked spare cash or keys. And slowly, quietly, I started to feel something return control. Meanwhile, Noah and Vanessa mistook my silence for surrender. They hosted a dinner at their house one Saturday. Roast chicken wine glasses clinking Vanessa in an apron that had never seen grease. After dessert, she brought out her laptop, pulled up a slideshow of retirement communities. "I kid you not, a slideshow. This one has a putting green," she chirped. "This one has a salon on site. This one's only $3,000 a month, practically a bargain." I nodded, sipped my coffee, and said nothing. But inside, I was memorizing every word, every glance they exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking. And when Vanessa clicked to the slide showing Sunny Crest's financial requirements, I caught Noah's reflection in the window. Hungry. That's the only word. Hungry. For my house, for my bank account, for control. That night, back in my kitchen, I spread Frank's journal, Pastor Jim's note, and a stack of bills across the table. My hands shook, but not from grief this time. From resolve. I don't know what's in that storage unit, but I know this Frank wanted me to have it, not them. And if my son thinks his mother is a pawn, he's about to learn she's the queen. Stick with me, because the next move, that's where everything starts to shift. And I promise it's worth seeing where this ends. Before I tell you what I found, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It means more than you know to see how far a story like this can travel. Like they're planning a play, and all you have to do is sit in the audience and clap on cue. That's how it felt the Saturday Noah and Vanessa drove me to sunny Crest. It was one of those spring mornings Ohio gets right sky too blue to trust air sharp enough to make you think maybe winter finally lost. I wore my navy cardigan, the one Frank always said made me look serious but kind. That was deliberate. I wanted to look exactly like what they thought I was, a sweet, tired widow who'd let herself be guided. Vanessa came out of the house practically glowing. Yellow sundress hair, curled heels clicking across the porch like applause for herself. She had that brightness she puts on when she's selling something, whether it's an insurance policy, a used SUV, or me. "You look lovely, Rachel," she said, sliding into the passenger seat of Noah's SUV. "This is going to be fun, like a little outing." An outing, to tour my own future coffin with curtains. Noah drove, narrating like a tour guide. "Mom, they've got full-time medical staff. It's 20 minutes from our place. You'd see us all the time." I sat in the back, my purse on my lap. Inside was Frank's journal. And inside that journal, tucked in the flap, were the papers David Morrison had handed me earlier that week. Bank statements, property deeds, every quiet move Frank had made for 20 years. If they wanted a show, I was ready to provide an intermission they'd never forget. Sunny Crest was as polished as Vanessa promised. Big brick buildings, circular drive, geraniums blooming in perfect planters. The kind of place designed to look like comfort, but smell faintly of antiseptic the moment you step inside. We were greeted by Patricia Wells, the marketing director. Mid-50s blonde hair sprayed into place handshake, just firm enough to suggest competence. She smiled at me, then at Noah and Vanessa. And here's what I noticed. Her eyes flicked to them first. Like she'd already decided who the decision makers were. That's the thing about age in America. The older you get, the more invisible you become in your own story. Unless you remind them. The tour was polite practice. Dining room with mashed potatoes and baked chicken on plates. 3 meals a day, snacks always available. Activity rooms, bingo, watercolor classes. Residents hunched over puzzles. A library full of large print books no one was reading. Vanessa squeezed my arm. Wouldn't it be nice to never have to cook again, to just relax? Relax. There was that word again. I nodded, asked questions. What about residents who travel longer trips? Patricia hesitated, then smiled. We accommodate short trips easily, but longer ones, well, the monthly fee continues regardless. It's about maintaining your home base. $4,000 a month for a home base, I murmured. Just loud enough. Finally, we toured a unit. 2nd floor. 1-bedroom kitchenette, hospital-style bed. Window overlooking the gardens. This would be perfect for you, Mom, Noah said, standing in the middle of the room like he owned it. Plenty of light. Look at that view. I looked. The gardens were neat, too neat, like a painting of freedom instead of the thing itself. How much personal furniture can residents bring? I asked. Patricia smiled. We encourage photos, keepsakes, small items, but the apartments are furnished with essentials, so no need for heavy pieces. I imagined 40 years of living quilts, books, Frank's recliner reduced to small items. And right then, something inside me shifted. Quietly, like the click of a lock before the door swings open. We ended in Patricia's office. She handed us a folder with glossy brochures. The basic monthly fee is $3,800, she explained. Additional care can bring it up to $6,500. We require verification of at least 2 years' resources, bank statements, property valuations, investments. Noah leaned forward, too eager. And if resources are limited? I swear the way his voice dipped on that word limited, you'd think he was already counting my imaginary debts. Patricia Polite explained about Medicaid. I let them talk. Let them imagine they were steering the wheel. Then I reached into my purse. Actually, I said softly, why don't we save time? 3 pairs of eyes turned to me. I laid Frank's leather journal on the table. Slowly, like a priest setting down a Bible. Then I slid out the folder David Morrison had given me, thick with papers. Patricia blinked. Vanessa tilted her head, confused. Noah froze. These are my bank statements, I said. Investment summaries, property deeds, insurance policies. I spread them like a card dealer. 1, 2, 3. So there's no question about resources. Silence. You could have heard the air conditioning hum. Patricia glanced at the numbers, then back at me, her professional smile faltering. Well, this is more than adequate. Noah reached for one of the statements, his fingers twitching. Mom, what? Don't I said, and my voice landed like a gavel. You've had plenty of chances to ask me directly. You chose not to. I looked at Patricia. You should know I'm not here because I need this place. I'm here because my son and his wife insisted. They seem convinced I can't manage on my own. Vanessa flushed crimson. Rachel, that's not what you told Patricia before I walked in. Not what you rehearsed in the car. Her mouth opened shut. I turned to Noah. Tell me something. If I moved here and ran out of money in 5 years, would you take me into your house? Give me a room. Support me. The silence was answer enough. I gathered the papers back into the folder, slid them into my purse, and placed my hand on Frank's journal. My husband prepared me for this, I said. He knew what I'd face. And he left me more than money. He left me the reminder that I've been running my own life for 62 years. I don't need a manager. I don't need a babysitter. And I don't need sunny Crest. Patricia cleared her throat. Mrs. Monroe, of course, the choice is entirely yours. Yes, I said, it is. The walk back to the car was different. Vanessa stayed a few steps ahead, her heels biting the pavement. Noah's jaw was tight, his silence louder than any argument. And me, I felt taller, lighter. Like the invisible weight they'd tried to hang on me had slid off. Because here's the thing, injustice feels like drowning until you remember you know how to swim. That day, in a retirement home lobby, I stopped being their victim and started being their storm. Stick with me, because what came next, that's when the masks began to crack. And trust me, you'll want to see who begged who broke, and who finally learned what it means to underestimate the wrong woman. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I like to picture the map little pins of light, each one proof that stories like this still matter. You ever seen the way news travels in a small town, faster than fire and dry brush, and twice as merciless? By Monday morning, half of Willow Bend knew what had happened at Sunny Crest. I didn't have to say a word. Folks who were in the building did the talking for me. A nurse's cousin, a church acquaintance who just happened to be there visiting her aunt. Word spread the way it always does in towns like ours, whispered at the grocery store, checkout retold in the hair salon chairs passed along over coffee at the diner. And here's the kicker. Somehow the story got sharper every time it changed hands. By Wednesday, people weren't just saying Rachel showed her son who's in charge. They were saying Rachel Monroe pulled out a folder thicker than a Bible and left that boy red-faced. Was it embellished? Probably, but I'll admit I didn't mind one bit. The fallout landed squarely on Noah and Vanessa. At Rotary Club, where Noah liked to strut in his tailored suit, folks stopped nodding politely and started raising their eyebrows. At the insurance office where Vanessa worked, clients whispered, "That's the one who tried to push her mother-in-law into Sunny Crest." They weren't villains in the town's eyes. No people rarely paint family that black. But they were exposed. Their ambition showed through the paint. And that shine Vanessa worked so hard to polish, it cracked. Noah came by that Friday. No Vanessa, just him standing on my porch with his hands shoved deep in his pockets like a kid caught skipping class. "Mom," he started, voice low. "We might have handled things wrong?" "Might have?" I asked. He winced. "Okay, we pushed, but we were trying to help." There it was, that word again. Help. Like if you say it enough times, it makes everything noble. I invited him in, poured him coffee in the mug Frank used for decades, the one with the chipped rim. He sat at the table where he'd done his spelling homework, eyes flicking to the same mantel where his father's photo now stood. "You didn't ask what I wanted," I said softly. "You decided. And that's not help. That's control." He stared into his coffee. For a second, just a second, I saw the boy he'd been. The one who used to crawl into my lap after nightmares, sweaty forehead, pressed against my collarbone, whispering, "Don't let go, Mom." But that boy was long gone, buried under years of entitlement, and a wife who measured life in assets. He cleared his throat. "Vanessa thinks we should apologize. Officially, maybe over dinner." I smiled. Dinner would be fine. But understand, this apologies don't erase intentions. They just acknowledge them. He nodded, but I could see it in his eyes, regret mixed with resentment. He wasn't sorry for what he'd done. He was sorry he'd been caught. And while Noah and Vanessa scrambled, I began rebuilding. I called David Morrison, my lawyer, and said, "It's time to set up a trust. Not for Noah, not for Vanessa, for causes that mattered." We created a scholarship fund at the community college in Frank's name for students studying trades, heating, plumbing, welding. Because Frank believed the world runs on men and women who know how to fix things with their hands. We set aside money for the church's food pantry, which had fed half this town during the factory layoffs in '09. And I made arrangements to sell the extra property Frank had been quietly holding, a scrappy little lot out near the river, and funnel the proceeds into Habitat for Humanity. Every move felt like placing bricks in a new foundation. My foundation, not one built on other people's pity or control. The first time word got out about the scholarship, Miss Carol from choir hugged me so tight I thought my ribs might crack. "Rachel, you're giving kids a chance they never thought they'd get," she said, eyes shining. And I'll admit it felt good. Not just to give, but to be seen. To remind myself and everyone else that I wasn't fading. I was growing. Of course, Vanessa tried her own brand of damage control. She showed up one Sunday after church, all smiles, handing me a lavender candle wrapped in cellophane. Just a little something, she said, to show we care. I lit the candle after she left. It smelled like vanilla and apology. Both burned too quick. At night, I sat with Frank's journal open on the table. Some nights, I traced his messy handwriting with my finger, whispering his words out loud just to hear them in the room. Other nights, I wrote in the margins, notes about the day, thoughts about the trust, even little prayers of thanks. That journal had started as his, but it was becoming ours, a conversation across the divide. The biggest change wasn't money or trust funds or whispers around town. It was me. I walked taller. I slept deeper. I cooked less for survival and more for pleasure. I even laughed again, real belly-deep laughs at Pastor Jim's bad jokes over coffee. Because once you survive betrayal from your own blood, once you stand in a room meant to diminish you, and instead claim it, something shifts. You stop living like prey. You start living like proof. One evening, sitting on the porch watching the sun melt into the cornfields, I thought about Frank. He'd always told me, "Rach, you've got more steel in you than you realize." I used to roll my eyes at that. But now I understood. Noah and Vanessa had tried to write the ending of my story. But Frank had left me the tools to pick up the pen. And I was writing something they'd never expect. Fallout isn't just wreckage, it's clarity. It shows you who stands by you when the storm hits, and who is secretly hoping the wind would carry you away. And rebuilding. It's not about patching old walls. It's about laying new ones, stronger, wiser, and this time entirely on your own terms. Stick with me because in part 5, I'll tell you how the story ends. How legacy gets rewritten when you stop asking for permission. And how freedom once claimed tastes sweeter than any inheritance. And before you go, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I love seeing all the places these stories reach. It reminds me we're not as alone as we sometimes feel. They say time softens things. I don't believe that. Time doesn't soften. Time sharpens. It peels away what doesn't matter until you're left holding only the truth. And my truth. It's that I'm not the same woman who stood in that church basement with a casserole spoon in one hand and a clipboard shoved in the other. 6 months had passed since sunny Crest. 6 months since I laid those bank statements on a polished table and watched the color drain from my son's face. At first, the town buzzed with it like gossip bees swarming a hive. Then, like all things, the story faded. Folks found new things to whisper about the school board election, a fight at the high school football game, the new Dollar General opening on Main. But while the gossip quieted, my life did not. I started volunteering at the community college again. 1 day a week, then 2. The same halls where I'd shelved books for 20 years now echoed with footsteps of kids who barely looked old enough to drive. Some came from farms, some from trailer parks, some from houses with 2 parents working double shifts. They reminded me of my own students years ago, bright, stubborn, desperate for someone to look them in the eye and say, "You're capable." So that's what I did. I set up study groups. I stayed late to help a single mom with her GED prep. I even taught a boy named Jamal how to fill out his FAFSA line by line, just like I once did for Alicia. Every time one of them said, "Thanks, Mrs. Monroe," I felt Frank's voice in my ear. "See, this is what I meant. This is your steel." The scholarship fund in Frank's name started small. 1 award that first semester, just enough to cover books and tools. But when word spread, donations trickled in. Old clients from Monroe Heating and Air mailed checks with notes scribbled, "Frank fixed our furnace in '92 and wouldn't take a dime extra. Wanted to give back." By spring, we'd funded 5 scholarships. 5 kids who otherwise might have dropped out before they even started. And every time a student stood up at the award ceremony and said, "Thank you to the Monroe Fund," I swear I could see Frank leaning against the back wall, arms crossed, grinning like a fool. Now about Noah and Vanessa. Their apologies came in waves, first defensive, then remorseful, then just plain awkward. One evening, Noah stopped by alone. He sat on the porch steps, face shadowed, and said, "Mom, I didn't know Dad had all that money. I thought—" His voice trailed. "You thought I was poor, I finished for him. Helpless." He winced. "I thought you needed me." I studied him, my grown son, with the worry lines I once kissed away when he scraped his knees. And I felt something I hadn't expected, not anger, not bitterness. Sadness, because it hit me he'd stopped seeing me as a person the moment Dad died. He saw me as a responsibility, a problem to manage. And that's worse than cruelty. It's erasure. I put a hand on his arm. "Needing you and being controlled by you aren't the same thing, Noah?" He nodded, but his eyes didn't quite meet mine. Some truths are too heavy for people to carry all at once. Vanessa's strategy was different. She tried charm, bringing me candle scarves, even dropping hints about grandchildren someday, as if that would melt everything away. But I'd learned the difference between gifts and gestures. A gift is about the receiver. A gesture is about the giver. Vanessa was all gesture. So I accepted her candles, smiled politely, and then went right back to writing checks to the food pantry. The real turning point wasn't with them, though. It was with me. One night, sitting at my kitchen table, I opened Frank's journal. The leather was worn smooth now from months of my hands tracing it like a worry stone. His notes filled the first half-part numbers, measurements, names of clients. The second half was mine now. I'd filled it with my own handwriting. Thoughts, reflections, even scraps of conversations I didn't want to forget. One page read, "Help that comes with strings isn't help. It's a leash." Another, "Fallout isn't wreckage, it's revelation." And another, written in block letters, "The night I couldn't sleep, I am not done." That journal had become our shared book of life. His wisdom, my resolve. His foresight, my future. Legacy is a word people misuse. They think it's about money, land, houses passed down, jewelry tucked in boxes, stocks with names nobody can pronounce. But the real legacy, it's what you leave in people, not what you leave to them. Frank left me strength disguised as numbers on a page. I was leaving strength disguised as opportunities for kids who didn't even know my name. That's legacy. 6 months to the day after sunny Crest, I found myself on a stage in the college auditorium. The scholarship recipients sat in the front row, fidgeting with their ties and dresses. Parents wiped eyes. Dean Matthews handed me a plaque that read, "In honor of Rachel Monroe for outstanding community contribution." I never expected applause at 62. But when it came loud, sincere, filling that little hall, I didn't shrink. I stood. Because once you've survived being underestimated by your own family, you learn something rare. You're not afraid of being seen anymore. That night, alone in my kitchen, I lit one of Vanessa's candles. Vanilla too sweet. I set it beside Frank's photo. "I did it," I whispered. "I finally figured out what to do with what you left me." The flame flickered, and for a moment the house felt less empty. You know what I realized? Freedom doesn't look like running away. It looks like standing still in your own skin and knowing nobody can move you without your consent. And dignity, it isn't given. It's claimed. Quietly, firmly, every day you choose not to let anyone else write your story. So, if you're listening to this late at night, maybe with a cup of coffee going cold beside you, hear me? It doesn't matter if they call you weak. It doesn't matter if they treat you like a burden. It doesn't matter if they whisper about what's best for you while planning your absence from your own life. What matters is this: you're stronger than they think, more capable than they believe, more valuable than they know. And the greatest revenge, it isn't anger, it isn't payback, it's living free. I still keep Frank's journal on the table. But now beside it, I keep a brand new notebook. The first page is blank, waiting for me to write the next chapter. Because 62 isn't the end of the story. It's just the start of the part where you stop apologizing for existing. That's my legacy. Not the dollars in a bank account, not the land my son once thought he'd inherit. My legacy is the courage to stand up even when your knees shake. The choice to give even when people tried to take. The decision to live fully, freely, and unapologetically. That's what I'll leave behind. And I hope wherever you are listening to this, it's what you'll choose too. If this story spoke to you, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love watching these stories travel farther than I ever dreamed my own life could. And remember, your story isn't over. Not by a long shot.